Welcome back to another Divorce at Altitude podcast episode. I'm Amy Goscha, and I have with me today David Kopp from LPL Financial. How are you doing, David?
I'm great, Amy. Thanks so much for having me on today.
Yeah, I really like doing these podcast episodes, and they're really fun. Really excited to talk about what you do. So, kind of just to jump in, can you tell me what your background is?
Absolutely. So I'm getting ready to start my 25th year in the business as a wealth manager. I started out helping people. I've always enjoyed that. And I started helping people by preserving their wealth and to grow their wealth. And over time, I realized that that was fun and all. However, I found a lot more value in becoming a financial planner and helping people protect all of their assets and not just their investments, but also looking at their whole financial picture instead.
That's great. And so you and I met through a mutual or a colleague of mine. I was introduced to you because you can really be an asset to kind of my team in helping a client. Can you explain to me, how you got into the realm of working with divorce clients?
Oh, yes, absolutely. It was actually more of something I stumbled upon than something that I had planned. And sometimes the best things in life work out that way. Um,
Right.
the person who had initially introduced you and I together, I had met him again by accident. And I had asked him when we sat down, we were talking and getting to know each other. And I just asked him, what did he find was his greatest challenge? And his answer was nothing that I had even expected him to say. He said that he puts in so much time to prepare for these meetings that he has and the cases that he goes to court with, and he feels he's ready to answer any question or be ready for any scenario. However, he typically gets the one scenario that he doesn't feel so great with. So even after he has a great ending to the case, they win, they get exactly what they were going after, then the client will ask him one final follow up question, which is this enough? Will this last long enough?
That's a very difficult question. So how do you start even unpacking that question?
So the question, and this is the biggest one, is it enough? How long will it last? Is really the important one because there are no second chances. This is the one shot or the one chance to make sure that you've got enough assets to last for the duration of your life. So, a lot of times, an attorney is so well equipped to do an amazing job of representing their client and making sure that they get their fair share and what's fair and due to them. However, they may not have the same strengths that I would bring to the table, which is to find out through a financial comprehensive plan of will this be enough? So the assets may seem so much on paper of however much that the client may get for their half, but there's so many other landmines and things that may come into play, things like inflation that I know we'll talk about here in the next couple minutes, but may not be factored in. So while that number may seem great right up front, we all know that life is so much more expensive than we realize day to day.
Right. So let's talk about the team approach. So, um, what is a wealth manager's role?
Great question. So, like so many things, it's changed in life. Even 20, 30 years ago, it was mainly just handling investments. So, the old thinking was you would do your job, Amy, which is to represent your client the best you can, get what's fair to the client. You would then make a referral to me. I would then just manage the money the best I could to preserve the wealth and to try to grow it as best as possible. But that has come a long way since then. Now we're finding there's so much more benefit to integrating both of our strengths, yours and mine, and our services before this case even starts to find out what's important ahead of time. By finding out what's most important to the client and where the most beneficial assets will be for the client, it helps you, Amy, do a better job at representing the client to know what assets to go for and what will be best suited for your client, as well as during and after. So instead of just having the situation where it works better after, this also, there's so much value in bringing a financial planner or a wealth manager in ahead of time.
Right. And, with my role, when a client comes to me, I mean, and we'll talk more about, the state of where people are when they're going through divorce. But they're really looking to me for advice to handhold them on, what is equitable, what should we go after. And I don't always, it's great to have someone who specializes in that area to guide me, because I frankly might not always know.
Yeah, that's really a great point. Also, to kind of bring this around, bringing me in or someone like myself in ahead of time and doing a financial plan, it really helps things out for so many different reasons. A couple of them that come to mind are, for most people, this is the largest financial transaction they will ever have in their life. Also, I know you can relate to this as so many people can. Putting something down on paper just calms the moment down. If you've ever gotten up in the middle of the night and you've got so many things running through your head, how will this happen? How will I work through this? And just any normal day situation of things that come up in your head, once you put them down on paper, everything just feels calmer and a little more organized and a little more in control. A financial plan, yeah. So a financial plan lets you put things down on paper, lets you prioritize, lets you categorize things so that you can stay focused and clear your mind of things that are just running overwhelming. That's the financial part. There's also the emotional part. A divorce, it's not just about the money, there's so much emotion involved. The less you have inside your head, the more you can maintain a clearer head of what's important to you, picking up the pieces, moving on with your life. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does, and I also see that with clients because they are so overwhelmed, one day they might, if they might write something down, but the next day they might write something else down just because there's so much going on that, they're just kind of in a tailspin. So I think having the team approach of your divorce attorney and a wealth manager come in is super critical at the onset.
Absolutely. Again, having more than one set of eyes is beneficial, especially in what could be potentially your most vulnerable period of time. Things that could be the most routine or mundane things in your life are so instantly overwhelming because you've got so many things going on. So, again, the more things you can compartmentalize and put down on paper, the more calm everything seems to be. And also, to add to what you had said, you can sit down with someone, and I know this has happened to you on both ends, meaning you as an attorney and you as just a consumer in life. You'll sit down with someone on something and they'll explain it. And when you're sitting in the meeting, excuse me, it makes complete sense. And then as soon as you get up and walk away, you think, what was that about? What did they say here? This way, to put something down on paper, you'll be able to remember it the next day and the day after. And then when things do change, you'll at least have a starting point in which your financial plan will be able to remain fluid with your ever changing needs in your life, because what happens today is probably not going to be as important to you or regimented as it would be in a year or two.
Right, and this is a super critical point, I think, and we kind of touched on it, but when is the right time to bring you in as the wealth manager for someone going through divorce?
Yeah, I would say right after the first consultation, it's important to establish some sort of rapport between you and your potential client. So you wouldn't need me or someone again in my line of work into that meeting. There may just be too many moving parts for the first meeting. But after the first meeting, if there's some sort of synergy that's formed between you and your potential client, then the next steps would immediately be to bring myself or someone in our field into the meeting to start looking at analyzing the balance sheet, the assets. And I don't want it to sound completely financial, because when you're going through a divorce, the last thing you're thinking about is financials. You're more just trying to figure out, what will I do with my children? Who will get what schedule? And you're thinking with a different part of your brain, not the analytical side. You're thinking more with the emotional side, as you should be. That's why you would bring in someone with the financial analytical side, but someone who can bridge the two emotions of the emotional side and the financial together, but do it in a way that doesn't seem like you're being grilled on things that you normally would be very routine, but now seems so overwhelming. Does that make
So
sense?
essentially, yeah, it does. And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like what you're saying also is that a client can take control of their finances by bringing a wealth manager in with their divorce attorney at the beginning.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. One thing that I've seen and noticed, again, I've been working for about 23 years with family law practices like yourself, and I've noticed that the biggest concern that the client has is the unknown. What is the outcome going to look like? We all want to know. It's like, unfortunately, an analogy would be like watching a scary movie for the first time. As soon as you watch it, you're biting your nails, wondering, how is this going to end? Boy, I wish I kind of knew how this would end. By bringing in
Right.
someone ahead of time and having a team of professionals looking at everything ahead of time, they can provide insight to tell you, here's what the end of the movie is going to look like. And again, going back to the analogy, once you've seen the scary movie, so to speak, or the horror movie, go back and watch it a second time. It's a completely different experience because you already have an idea of the ending and it's not nearly as daunting or overwhelming. So the same thing would apply here. We sit down together with you, myself, and with the client, and we already discern what's the most appropriate assets, and we give you an idea of what the end of this story is going to look like. And again, in the time of such uncertainty, any form of an idea of what the end's going to look like is a very welcome emotion.
Right. So we've covered that it's really important to bring you in at the beginning of the process. Let's talk a little bit about what that process would look like. So if I had a client and brought you in the beginning, you had a meeting with them. What is kind of your general, I guess, process?
Great. Yeah. So the last thing I would do, knowing that the client again can barely sometimes even hold it together because of the stresses of focusing on my life has been structured this way for so many periods of time. And now it's all about to change. So the last thing that I would come in is start asking questions that are so analytical that they either don't care, don't know, or don't have an interest in. So what my job is to discern information, but do it in a way that they can relate to without creating a sense of feeling overwhelmed or a deer in the headlights. So in English, I'm basically gathering financial data, which helps me do a better job and provides this information for you. So I would do fact gathering of the complete financial picture of both parties, what they have assets wise, liabilities, income flow, assets, tax brackets, stuff like that, but not in a mathematical way. And then I would then present this information to you, Amy, so that you would know what is the right approach to go after when these division of assets come up. I say this because someone may need a lot more income than another type of client. Some assets may need more low cost basis because of their tax bracket, and others just may need more assets that produce dividends. Everyone is going to be different and unique, but the more you, Amy, know about them, and not just what they tell you, but what they have, the better job you can do in going after what assets are most appropriate.
Yeah, and also from my role, that's what I'm doing as well is kind of information gathering, financial gathering, because we have to complete the 16.2 disclosure. So that's a great time to have you come in as well, because the client is doing that anyway, to have your expertise. And I think another important thing is that you also help with you talked about income. Why is it important to figure out how much income someone has or needs?
Yes, absolutely. Because every scenario is going to be different, but you may find that someone in or one of the cases that you're working on you may come from a family where only one of the partners is working and the other one is not used to working or doesn't have the ability to replicate that high level of income. So, in that case, you would be forced to find assets that would create that income stream or reproduce it, whereas they may not typically have the skill set to do that. For example, if one of the spouses was a surgeon and the other one didn't have that type of specialized training, then immediately you would be less inclined to go after the big house up in Aspen, which would be basically a noose around your neck because of the liability and the debt than the outflow of cash. And you'd be looking for more things that would create income to keep up with just the daily cost of living. Also, something that I found when I sit down with family law attorneys like yourself is that you have such a tight window of time from when this first starts until the assets are divided. So bringing in someone like me, you can hand off some of the asset gathering to me so you can focus on other aspects of the case, and therefore you'll be more prepared and do a better job and serve the client even better, if that makes sense.
That does. And one thing that I think also is important is that we also, I have to figure out a budget for the client moving forward. And that's something that you can also help with. Is you can run different scenarios to show the client, here's what you need in order to, you know, live now, but also into the future. Is that correct?
100%. And you just said the key word, which is the future. What I mean by that is the one thing that is typically overlooked, I see time and time again, is over time, the person that you represent, no reflection of you, just either side is going to typically become poorer and poorer because the assets that they may get initially or the income level that they may get is typically going to decline over time. That's simply not the wealth manager doing a bad job. It's because the cost of living continues to escalate. If you look right now, we are really in a high inflationary cycle that we have not seen in years. Where just go to the grocery store and you'll see, my goodness, the cost of food is out of control. The cost of education for schooling is out of control. Assisted living facilities. So the cost keeps going up even though your income may or may not. So it's important when you do a budget to factor in tomorrow's dollars, not just today. So the amount of money you have today may work perfect with even extra laying around to take a vacation or do something. But you'll find that over time, it'll become worth less and less unless you factor in inflation into your scenario.
Yeah, I know we've talked about this before where when someone's going through divorce, they might not be able to see what they need into the future just because there's so much going on emotionally. So having, a team approach with you, someone like you, someone like me, really looking at the future and helping plan is super important.
Absolutely. And we don't ask the clients things like, what do you think you'll need in the future? Again, they probably got up and wondered how they were even going to get into your office today and get the kids off to school. Those become such overwhelming tasks to do. Whereas normally those used to be so routine, but now they're so out of their comfort zone, knowing, am I doing the right thing? Should I be getting a divorce? Should I not? How will I be able to survive? So that's my job to factor in inflation. And again, we talked about what assets would be most appropriate because at the end of the day, I think a lot of times people get stuck on, well, I got half. Half isn't always equitable. Half could be
Right.
detrimental depending on which assets you're going after. So, doing a financial plan ahead of time will help you, Amy, decide which is the most equitable 50% assets for your clients.
And you said something very key. Half is not always, half is not always equal. Like that's very, important to for clients to understand. So let's talk about that. In Colorado, the law is that division of marital property is equitable. Most times that is, a 50-50 division. But can you talk to me, David, about, how are all assets not created equal?
Oh, great question. Absolutely. So Cash, for example, using the most simplest form of an asset is cash. There's no ramifications tax wise to it. It's cash. It doesn't have much growth. It's just sitting there. It represents safety and liquidity. Whereas going to the other extreme, there may be something like a piece of property. Let's say that you run into a potential client and that client receives the house, the primary residence. Well, you didn't realize, and it's again not your fault. This isn't your area that you're supposed to focus on, and neither did the client. But you realize the client now, the divorce is over, the client's living in the house and says, I don't want this house anymore. It brings back too many negative memories. I want to move. Now the client puts the house on the market and didn't realize that there's such a low cost basis on the house, so all of a sudden, even though they did fine and sold the house for a nice sum of money, unfortunately, they have to pay the government a very big sum of money. So all now we're not looking at the amount of money that we thought was 50%. We're now chiseling down from the 50 and now we're looking more into the 40 something or even less percent range because taxes were never factored in. We were looking at over the top. Whereas
Right.
cash again is cash. And another example could be something as simple as corporate stock or stock options, depending on if one of the spouses or both have a bunch of low cost stock. The same thing applies. So taxes are very crucial to knowing, am I getting 50%? So that's an example of what we're talking about where half is not always equitable.
Yeah, or there's a scenario where, if people have a lot of money in retirement, but you need someone who needs access to money, you're not going to want them to have all of their assets tied up in retirement. That's another, good example. Or when you were talking about the house and someone wants to stay in the house, from a legal perspective, if you're keeping the house, we're going to value it based off of fair market value. And then, like you said, if they then decide to sell it, then they have the sales cost and the tax issue. Um,
Amy, that is such an amazing point that you brought up. To piggyback onto what you're saying, that's another issue, not just the house, but now all of a sudden, it's all too common to get half of a tax deferred plan like an IRA or a 401k. Neither of those have experienced taxes. So if you have your client and they inherit a bulk of their 50%, comes in the form of a tax deferred, like we're talking about an IRA or a 401k, and now the client needs access to the assets for liquidity. Now, all of a sudden, we've got not just taxes, but if the client is under the age of eligibility, now we've got a penalty that's up to 10% on
right.
top of this. So every dollar that you take out could be as high as 40 or 50% of every dollar you take, you give to Uncle Sam in taxes. So again, reiterating, you're not getting 50%. Whereas on paper, it looked very clean and simple. Yay, I got 50%. Here's half of his IRA or her IRA. But in reality, that's just not how it really is. So it's a little more complicated than it seems of splitting the assets on paper.
Yeah, and also splitting the assets is highly tied to, spousal maintenance if someone needs that. And, if I'm representing someone who is the earner, how much can my client pay versus, if I'm representing the person that needs the spousal maintenance, how much do they need? And it's very tied to assets as well, because we can look at, can we give someone an income producing asset to lower the spousal maintenance, obligation. So those really are tied together when I'm trying to figure out what's best for my client.
Absolutely. And again, to piggyback to what you said, if in your scenario you're representing the earner, is it better to provide assets to the receiving spouse, not your client, but the other party? Or is it better to pay in income? Is it better to pay child support or alimony? There's tax advantages to each of the scenarios and there's disadvantage. So we run income analysis to find out what's most tax favorable. Again, you're not trying to cheat anyone, but you're trying to do what's equitable, but at the same time, what's most efficient tax wise for the client, but still doing the correct and honorable thing to the other party.
Right. So let's talk about, we talked about bringing you in at the beginning in that financial or information gathering stage. The next kind of piece in my case is going to be probably setting the case for mediation. How can we work as a team when I'm preparing to go to mediation, and how can you help the client and me be a better attorney in mediation?
Oh, great question. Okay, so bringing me in ahead of time does create a few advantages. One, as I've already mentioned, just getting something on paper gets it out of your head where everything is just running around and you can't keep all your thoughts controlled. This puts it down on paper. Secondly, a financial plan typically costs anywhere up to five or even $7,000. My plan is complimentary. It's not that I'm a non for profit by nature. It's just that the financial plan is just as much for me and for you, Amy, as it is for the client. I use or liken this to going to your doctor. Your doctor has to ask questions. They don't just say, "Oh, your stomach hurts? Get the scalpel, nurse. Let's cut them open and start surgery." They have to work up a profile to find out what the most appropriate course of action is. So do I. So I don't charge anything for the financial plan to gather the data and provide it to you. Also, the financial plan is, as I mentioned, a very fluid process. So if in the middle of it you get a curveball thrown at you, something that wasn't disclosed during the first phase or the discovery phase, we can update the plan on the fly so we can make changes and stay fluid with the situation, as we know that life requires that to happen regularly.
Right. And then one thing I'd like to mention is that when you're going through divorce, like you mentioned that things are expensive. We have inflation; it's really expensive to live on your own. But when you're doing your budget, you need to think about certain things like, what if you have to replace a hot water heater in a home? There's just certain things that I'm guessing that you have specific questions that you can ask people that they're not thinking of that need to be added into their budget.
Absolutely. So we ask all the questions that we can think of, and then I factor in the miscellaneous column just for things, as you just so eloquently said, that you can't think of, because that's how life is. It's always something that you weren't expecting. So that could be anywhere between 17 and 23 additional percent. Factor it into the budget as well, if that
Yeah,
makes.
that does. And also, when I'm looking at spousal maintenance, a lot of times the first question people have is, how much am I going to get? And in Colorado, we have an advisory guideline, but then we have the factors that really look at, what is your need? And so if I extrapolate the formula and I say, oh, you could get 18,000 per month, they might say, oh, I can live off of that, but maybe they can't when they actually look at, what is their lifestyle and how much it costs.
Absolutely. How much am I going to get is such an arbitrary question. And I don't think it's as relevant as people think. It may sound like a great number, but I think the bigger question that you just said yourself is, how much do you need? That is way more important than how much am I going to get? And you would just be throwing out a ballpark. And with something as important as your one shot in life, you've got to be more specific than a ballpark. Also, I find that so many times people haven't even done a financial plan when they were together, or if they have, they've never done one individually on their own. It was always when the assets were together. What are we going to do for the children together? Now it's time to start looking for you and taking care of you and putting together a financial plan for you for the next phase of your life.
Right. And that's very important looking into the future. So, say that in our scenario, we went to mediation, the assets are divided. How can you help a client moving forward?
Oh, great question. So, based on the results of the financial plan, we sit down, we put down everything that's important to the client. And a couple of rules of thumbs that I typically follow is I encourage clients not to make big decisions in the first year. And the reason is this is they're just trying to sort out picking up the pieces of what the next steps are. A lot of times I work with people that they've been together for so many years that their identities are so intertwined that the first year or two, they're just trying to unwind and try to recreate their new identity. So we again do a financial plan because you've got to have some sort of basis. But the biggest mistakes are typically made when people make big decisions, purchases in the beginning. There's such an emotional element there, either out of spite or out of I can show them and move on and make a decision, that in the next year or two, you may find, what was I thinking? That's just not that important to me. So we try to encourage minimal decisions in the very beginning stages. But to tie it back to what you're asking, is we take the pre-divorce planning financial plan and we update it a little bit further and say, okay, this is what we were shooting for. This is how things ended up settling. Now we take these assets, this income, these tax brackets, and then we say, this is what's going to go on the rest of your life based on what you said was most important to you, so that we make sure that we cover the things like I mentioned, the inflation, and to make sure that the kids are taken care of, to make sure the things that are important to you are covered.
Right. And with anything in life, life happens, things change. And so, that financial plan needs to be updated. And sometimes people come back to me and, someone has lost a job or there needs to be a child support modification, and I can work with them along with you to look at, how should that be modified and how should their trajectory moving forward be, updated.
Absolutely. And again, tying into what you're saying, but also looking forward, some people will just come. I've had experiences where someone will say, I don't want to do this anymore. Can I? Or what if? And the what if is the biggest two words I find with anyone that I work with. What if? What if I decide to go to part time? What if instead of working the hectic 9 to 5, I want to do something where I put more into working as a nonprofit? Can I do this? And that's what the plan gives you, the freedom to know the answers ahead of time, so you can make the bold decisions and play more offense instead of defense and say, I'm going to do this with my life because I know the math will work for me.
Yeah, and that's one point that we didn't really talk about is it is important to bring you in and also, someone like me at the beginning of a divorce because you don't want to be on the defense. I think that's super important for a client to feel like they're not just on the defense, that they know what they know what they have, they know what they need, and they know what they need to go after.
Absolutely. Yes. So we've already talked fair amount about the pre-divorce planning and during the process, but then afterwards, so the case is over, the client gets this much in income, this much of assets, but then what? So transitioning the relationship, it's not just a transaction of thank you, I enjoyed working with you, good luck, hope it all
Right.
works out for you. But now it transitions you to the next phase. It's not just the division of assets, but now it's what do we do with them? How will they work? Because picking up the pieces is every bit as important as working on things ahead of time and getting everything in the pre planning process.
Right. That's a great point. So as we kind of wrap this up, we've talked about a lot of really important key points today. Can you just summarize what we've talked about that are the key points for clients to take away?
Absolutely. So, in the old traditional thinking, it was basically more of a transaction approach. And now there's so many benefits we're finding to the new ideas of taking more of a holistic approach when working with clients, having more eyes look at it, starting a financial plan ahead of it so that you're playing more offense instead of more defense, having an idea of what the outcome is going to be, a lot more clarity than wondering how is this whole thing going to work out, taking more control of your own life instead of hoping for the best and just seeing what happens. People are looking to take more control and have more responsibility and know the ending before the movie even starts, so to speak. bringing in a financial planner and someone, a wealth manager, to do a plan beforehand, during, and then transitioning the relationship to the longest part, which is after the divorce, when all the dust settles, is the new type of thinking. Instead of just, we've won a great case, we were awesome, but now what? And everyone's sitting around the table with a ton of questions.
If clients want to get a hold of you, what is the best way that they can get in touch with you?
Absolutely. So everyone has a different preferred method of communication. So if you would like to reach out to me, my phone number is 303-809-1976. That's my mobile, and it's with me at all times. My email address is david.kopp, which is spelled Kopp at lpl.com. And of course, a text is fine as well to the mobile number I've just given.
Great. Thank you, David. And thank you to everyone. Another great episode at Divorce at Altitude. We'll talk to you next time.